aligns with the priorities of the city and the outcomes they're trying to drive. There's not unlimited dollars out there, but how do you make sure you're really pushing towards the outcomes you want to achieve and making smart decisions based on the best evidence that exists? And so we're really feel really lucky that we could work with James, with Tammy, with all you all, with Chris and Eric from ResourceX in a way that hopefully will be really helpful. This will be one part of a larger amount of opportunities that we're doing with the city over the course of the next couple of years. And we're excited that this is one big kickoff to allow us to jump on in. You'll see Jennifer Park and Molly Daniel also from the Results for America Work Studies team. And a bunch of us will be popping in and out of the call because I'd like to take as much advantage as you all will. Molly, Jen, feel free to dive in if there's anything else. Back to you, Chris.
Sounds great. Thanks, Zach. And thank you, everybody. James, those were wonderful opening comments. And Zach, the spirit of everything that you said is why we're in business and our part of the puzzle here. We are Resource Exploration, ResourceX. My name is Chris Fabian. You'll hear from Jackie English. Jackie, go ahead and wait. And between the two of us and Eric Keck, who will join us tomorrow. Eric Keck is a former city manager who's now on our team, and he's implemented this process in 2 other cities as city manager. He'll join us tomorrow. Between the 3 of us, we're going to lead you through what we call a priority-based budgeting prep course, which is a full immersion in our processes and methodology to achieve the outcomes that James and Zach had espoused. We come from local government. Jackie was on the client side. She worked for the city of Greeley, Colorado, which is up north of Denver and near the city of Fort Collins, Colorado. And we're extremely passionate about this very mission. So we don't have enough resources to possibly do all of the great things that we need to do for our communities, and we believe wholeheartedly in the vehicle of local government to translate resources into fantastic outcomes for our citizens. So what to do when we don't have enough resources, and certainly with the pressures of revenue shortfalls in the COVID era, putting even more intense pressure on spending within our means and aligning scarce resources to outcomes. So usually we do this course in Denver. We're so pleased to be able to do it virtually with you all this morning and tomorrow. It is a packed course, but we have 2 kind of half days set up and designed to lead you through the basics of what this is all about, so you have a clear understanding of what your role would be, how to develop program inventories, how to do cost allocations, as James mentioned, and how to align resources with outcomes, and actually then how to pursue repurposing of resources as well. Today, Jackie's going to have the lion's share of the work of leading us through, and tomorrow, between Eric Keck and myself, we'll talk a little bit more about the cultural changes that come about, as well as looking far down the road, imagining when you have your data complete, how do you actually begin to apply it and take action. And I'll have that to round us out tomorrow afternoon. So with that, Jackie, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started. But thanks again, everybody. We're extremely pleased and consider ourselves lucky to have the chance to work with you these next 2 days.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay and is seeing a nice, beautiful picture of Tulsa City Hall here. I'm also going to, before I get started, put a link in the chat. It's just a Dropbox link, and it should give everyone here access to my slides, or at least to be able to download and view them, just in case, you know, some folks like being able to have the slides to follow alongside, or reference back at a later point in time. So they are accessible at that link and available for your download and viewing. But with that said, like Chris said, we're just going to jump on in. My role today is to just acclimate folks to the idea of program-based business intelligence. and hopefully we're gonna have some fun. Normally we would at this time be eating some snacks at the prep course. So hopefully some of you have your own snacks. I had some snacks before this and I feel ready to go. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. Before we do anything too formal though, I wanna make sure that there's some comfort using Zoom and point out some features if folks haven't used it yet. I know, it's often used in the posture of the world today, but just in case, you have the ability along the participants bar to raise your hand. If at any point in time you have a question and want to raise your hand, myself or Chris get notified that someone does have a question, and we are able to, just kind of stop and be able to pivot to that particular question. If, however, you're like, I can't find that button, and you just want to go ahead and interrupt us, that's fine too. Feel free to just stop us and ask a question at any point in time. Another way, if you're like, I can't find the unmute button and I can't find the raise hand button, if you want to express anything in the chat function, you have the ability, again, on that participants bar to hit that little arrow, which will expand the chat. And then you can either pop it out or expand it and type what you want. You can also see it at the bottom there. There's a little button that says chat. And then if you click that, there will be a chat window as well. So we will definitely use the chat feature as well as the unmute and mute features. First and foremost, starting with right now, I know we heard from some of you, but I would love to hear from some departmental representatives, hopefully at least one from every department, in terms of what they're expecting to learn and what they're expecting to do today and tomorrow. And I can call on some people, but I'd love for some volunteers to jump in as well. Anyone from, let's see, anyone from fire? I know we have two people from fire here.
Michael Baker from Fire here. So I think for us, there's often the rigid perception of a budget, and it's matching that to the outcomes and aligning with city priorities, much like our whole entire purpose of being here. So I think for me, it's how to translate that language to frontline workers and firefighters that makes sense and is logical.
Thanks, Michael. How about, I know we have a ton of people from finance. Anyone in particular from finance want to talk about what they're expecting to learn or do from this process? Got some shy finance folks.
This is Dwayne, and while finance is deciding who's going to speak, since it's a slew of them out there, I'm in the working in neighborhoods department, and we have several functions of our function that intersects with other departments. For instance, with fire, when we're working with, and the police department, when we're working with vacant and abandoned structures that's been occupied illegally by vagrants and the like, addressing all kinds of code complaints. And we interface, if you will, with streets department a lot, and parks when we're trying to build safe communities. So in a program sense, I'm really interested in how those functions in those departments, how they all intersect with each other, and how we can get really the most bang for the buck and coordinate our activities to build, quality neighborhoods.
That's great, thank you.
This is Chief Wendell Franklin. I'm with the police department, and I'm going to kind of echo what Dwayne said, in that more and more now we find that our departments intersect with the job functions that we're all tasked with. So it'll be very nice to see how we're able to to align our budgets to collaborate together, because there are things that from a police perspective I might need, and I'm counting on working in neighbors to make that happen, whether it's to board up an abandoned building and things like that. So we need to make sure that we have the proper budgets and resources in place so that we can use those resources to properly align with the overall mission for the city. And again, all of those things cross into one another. All the paths cross. The lighting, our streets, all of that stuff intersects with all of us.
Chief Franklin, thank you. I think that's a great point for all of us to be thinking about, is how we can, how we work together on delivering services and programs in Tulsa.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I'm Amy Brown. I'm in the mayor's office, and I think because of the nature of my role, I really do see a lot of what we do in terms of programs. But in the past, when James and I have sat down and looked at other cities that do like program-based budgeting, it just seems such a stark departure from where we are now that I'm honestly not really sure how we get there. So I'm expecting to learn a methodology, like a really practical way that we can try doing this. And I expect to be able to practice, to actually walk through like a concrete example, because conceptually I understand the benefits, but practically I'm not sure how to do it.
Thanks, Amy. Great point. We will definitely have opportunity in the software for you to practice and work, learn, and see, get your head wrapped around essentially how this looks, not only conceptually, but as you said, also methodologically, kind of in a hands-on sense. Is there anyone from Parks?
Yes. Is my mic working? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. This is Anna America with Parks, and for me, I have always thought, I mean, we tend to look at parks as many communities do, as somewhat, frivolous, the extras. And, as we have these conversations about these very serious goals of the city and addressing mental health and physical health and all of these other kind of outcomes, I know that the work that we do is crucial in all of that, but I hope that this process helps us sort of identify those places where we truly are addressing probably everything that's on the city's priority list in one way or the other is being addressed in parks programs, but we're not thinking of it that way, and frankly we're not funding it that way. And if we start thinking in those terms more, I'm very confident that will mean that we'll be investing more in some of the work that we're doing in parks, because we can see where it has this real impact in these areas, instead of thinking of it as, trees and flowers or games or things like that, but understanding how that really ties in with the city's overall mission.
Yeah, that's great, Anna. That's totally on point, and completely understand in terms of, trying to align to those results, that Parks does have a big influence in achieving those as well. Anyone else want to add something that in terms of things that they were expecting to learn or do today?
I don't want to necessarily call them out, but maybe I will. I know I've had a couple of conversations with some, like Dorita specifically is excited about this. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are, Dorita. And I know Tammy and I have talked about this as well. So I think it'd be interesting to hear your all's perspective.
Yeah, we do a lot of work planning, setting goals, strategic planning, and then we do a lot of work budgeting. And those two very difficult chores do not intersect that much. And so I am very interested at the point where those two can intersect to make the really hard choices that you have to make inside City Hall. So I'm interested in just the basic concept of how this is going to work.
Thanks, Dorita.
This is Vicki Williams from Finance Budget. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm interested in finding out the structure of the program and, you know, what we can learn today among what you have in the presentation, and any best practices, especially during this challenging time that we're in, so we can be any steps ahead, you know, from a budget and engagement standpoint. And then, and to just be aligned, to work with the different players on the call from within the city, and then those of you all that are presenting and sharing the information. So really excited about the program and what you have to offer.
All right. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to go, or I thought I heard someone. So we'll go ahead and continue. If there is, you know, if something does strike you in terms of something that you're expecting along the way or something like that, again, please feel free to use that chat function, and we can capture some of those changes or some of those expectations in that chat function as well. As we continue to look, you know, to see what expectations of yours that you do have for what you're expecting to learn and do, kind of here's a quick agenda. Like I said, today we'll be talking a little bit about what is program-based business intelligence, and then actually have some experience doing some exercises in the software. So I have kind of a test site for all of you to learn and begin to practice in. And we'll have some of that time as well, and then be able to have a little bit of a conclusion discussion, and we'll do a little bit of a happy dance at noon when we're able to end our session and head into lunch. And that's what today is going to look like. And then, as Chris said, tomorrow we're going to talk with two-time implementer and former city manager Eric Keck, who works now with ResourceX. He's going to talk about the people of PBBI, and Chris then is going to talk about the promise and looking forward into the future, what it looks like when your data is all gathered. Then we'll have, again, a little bit of a conclusion discussion and be able to end also by noon. So hopefully this kind of is a good framework for what you to expect going forward. But I do want to be able to start and jump right into talking about what the purpose of priority-based budgeting or program-based business intelligence is. And ultimately, we kind of frame this in two different outcomes. The first is communication, and the second is analysis. And so really what we promise is to be able to communicate and analyze the programmatic data that you create, communicate with and analyze that data, and be able to, you know, identify all different kinds of opportunities through that analysis and all different stakeholders that need to be communicated to. But they ultimately fall into these kind of two different buckets here. And these two different kind of communication and analysis framework, if you will, they blend nicely into what we call these PBBI levels of mastery, or essentially these different levels where we're able to think about what can we do with our program-based business intelligence overall. And so when we think about, you know, each of these, the first is kind of, they're not necessarily sequential, but the first at the bottom there is just to create the data and identify who to communicate to regarding all the programmatic data that was created. So again, kind of going back to that communication. The second level, we have what we call resource reallocation and maximization. So that's leaning more on that piece of analysis to say, okay, here's the way our programs are currently funded, and is there a way to reallocate or maximize our resources? I think some of you all were speaking this level 2 language, if you will, when we were thinking about the fact that there are so many different programs that overlap across multiple different departments identified here. We were talking working in neighborhoods, police, and others, streets. And so, you know, talking about the best use of those resources and the potential need to reallocate in order to maximize, you know, the impact of those particular programs is definitely what we would consider that level 2 language. The third level is what we call fueling the results of tomorrow. And so this is really about using your programmatic language not to think so much at reallocating resources for present, but also for the future as well, and trying to determine, you all were talking about, how do we impact some of those kind of, audacious goals, things like I heard someone mention mental health. That is kind of a result of tomorrow. And so we're definitely also, I'm hearing some language thinking about that level 3, and, trying to be able to reallocate funds in order to achieve some bigger results or some bigger things that we're thinking about being able to influence and impact in the city of Tulsa. And then last but not least, we have what we call a level 4, which is leveraging all community resources and really thinking beyond any particular jurisdiction of the city of Tulsa, but instead looking at the entire community's resources, looking at nonprofits, county resources, neighboring and adjacent communities and cities, maybe towns, and thinking about how there is a regional application to the programmatic data that you've created. So those are kind of each of the levels associated with program-based business intelligence, and some things about what can be done. In terms of examples here, I just want to quickly show as it relates to, first off, communicating that, this data does a lot in terms of communication. It reaches a lot of different audiences. Internally, it changes the way you communicate because you're able to speak that programmatic language, but you're also able to then communicate to the elected officials with this programmatic data. And here we have an example, a quote from an elected official out of the city of Duluth, talking about kind of how priority-based budgeting and program-based business intelligence has provided and highlighted how they have kind of high impact and high value areas, and it helps them align how they want to use their people and priorities to advance their vision and goals, very in line with what you all were talking about. And so this is a great quote from a newspaper article from when they initially started the implementation process, but it's even better to see a quote in action after they've been able to create the data and then act on it. And so here's a tweet from around COVID time, when it was getting kind of at its peak. In April, we have a quote from the same mayor at the time who was saying that she was able to announce 2 new business loans for their own city, as well as delivering a curbside library service, 16 miles of street work and city cleanup, and managing a $25 million budget shortfall. And so you can see here that they're using their programmatic data to deliver new and current services or core services during the pandemic, which is pretty amazing to be able to see. So again, just kind of what you're able to empower folks to do when you think about the program-based business intelligence and who you're communicating with internally as well as externally. This is kind of the language that you're able to begin using. So when we think moving into level 2, what we call resource reallocation, another example would be looking at the city of Littleton, Colorado, where they have gone through, created their program and identified some programs for actual changes in resources, and then gone through the process of kind of highlighting those in a particular worksheet that they made up and identified on our PBB blueprint what the opportunity was. Here we can see a screenshot of an opportunity for program efficiency. And you can see from fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2020, they were actually able to achieve that program efficiency and budget less for it as a result for this particular payroll processing program as an example. So again, looking at that resource reallocation, if an efficiency exists, can we reallocate those resources and then put it to a different program where we would want to see greater resources? Moving into another level here, we're looking at resource reallocation, again, kind of thinking in terms of immediate application of the data. We're looking at Boise, Idaho, who was able to utilize their program-based business intelligence for their continuity of operations planning. And they went through and asked all of their departments using their program inventory during, again, the time of kind of COVID and trying to figure out how to immediately respond. This was back in March. They asked all the departments what the risk to Boise, what the risk to the Boise community would be if they did not provide their program or service. So again, they're using those programs as a platform for conversation. And then with all of the associated data and that conversation, beginning to unlock and identify opportunities in a variety of different circumstances, whether that be COVID in this particular example, or in Littleton's case, just again, operating under normal circumstances, quote unquote. How do we reallocate resources and use programs as that platform to do it? And so here again, Boise was able to ask the question of how do they change service delivery based off of you know, the need for COVID-19 preparation and response. They looked at the risk as well as the impacts to public safety, economic impact, public health, and if it was required or legally mandated that they continue to operate or provide that particular service. Then they asked the question if there was the ability to adjust the program or service, and identifying if there was the potential for remote delivery as well. So again, just kind of an example of how to reallocate those resources. In this case, you know, this is very literal reallocation of human resources, of the hours that were spent changing the way that people were doing programs, or sometimes changing the programs altogether, changing the way that folks were being utilized in order to avoid layoffs, but also then, you know, continue safe delivery of programs overall. When we look into this achieving the results of tomorrow level, a great example would be the city of Kalamazoo, Michigan, who has been a long time proponent and user of priority-based budgeting and program-based business intelligence. And here you can see they have outlined, and this is you know, public information, they have outlined all kinds of aspirational projects that they have using their fund for excellence, or their foundation for excellence. And some of this just includes property tax savings and budget stabilization. But I would want to draw your attention to those aspirational projects. They've outlined approximately $20 million for aspirational projects in terms of thinking of the results of tomorrow, and kind of put them in these larger categories here of the money that they want to dedicate to each of these, such as affordable housing, economic development, infrastructure, so on and so forth. And they've actually kind of demonstrated that here in this other graphic to see what, you know, what money is going where and how they're, you know, specifically spending their results or their dollars to the results in those aspirational projects that they're trying to achieve. So you can see this is essentially an infographic that represents all of those different results that they're trying to achieve in the present and in the future. And then the last kind of example I would want to point out is that level 4 example. And we look most commonly at Washington County, Wisconsin, as a great example of leveraging community resources. They actually went on to merge a public health department with their neighboring Owazaki County. Here in this map you can see. And they went through, they used their programmatic data to assess what the potential cost savings were in the first year and then in ongoing years after that merge happened. They actually did all of this, you know, analysis using their programmatic data, and realized as well with their programmatic data that offering a public health department was mandated for each county. So based off of their program data, they realized that they were mandated to provide this service, and actually use this programmatic data to change the mandate, working with their state legislature in order to be able to offer this merged service and experience the cost savings that they analyzed using their programmatic data again. So really just kind of unlocking the potential of the entire community, leveraging all resources with their programmatic data as a great example of a level 4 client there. So those are kind of great examples, but I also, you know, want to talk very foundationally or concretely about what priority-based budgeting and priority-based business intelligence looks like for you all. So that was kind of a high-level overview of some examples or opportunities that exist to be used with PBBI, as we call it. But, you know, also want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to become familiar with the concepts generally. So when we think about PBBI, ultimately, I define it, and we all kind of define it as business intelligence that's developed by building data layers around programs. So here today, we're talking about PBBI prep, and we'll have the opportunity to interact with each of these subsequent data layers. But our foundational data layer, as many of you all have alluded to, is the program inventory. Programs are the key and the foundation for which everything else kind of pivots. So after we kind of look at the program inventory, then we are able to attach costs to those particular programs using the line item data, as well as looking at those results that you all were talking about in the attributes of a program in order to even further add data layer and build a more robust business intelligence data set using, again, those programs as the foundation. And then last but not least, we have the opportunity to add program insights and really think about not only the data and associated with the program, but in this case with the program insights, what the future of the program is as well, and thinking far more into whatever kind of definition of the future you want to have. If it's 5 months down the road, 5 years down the road, we still want to be thinking about what the future of this program is and how we can drive using this other data that we have in these subsequent data layers in order to achieve that insight that you're looking for. So that's kind of what we would describe as PBBI, as you may hear us call it. And it is just basically these data layers kind of interacting with each other. Overall, kind of the promise of the process as we go through is that you can create data and then add those insights, as I was talking about, to assess the future of those programs, and ultimately then act on those insights using the data that you've created as well as others. Thinking about, how to deal with a changing community, new needs, and limited resources, you use your data to identify the programs, the costs, and the alignment to results, and then actually be able to take action on those. And that's ultimately the promise of using program-based business intelligence, is to be able to act with the data that you've just created and reallocate those resources according to the insights that you have. So when we think kind of foundationally at data layer number 1, like I said, the programs are kind of the most important. Yeah, Hannah, this will I hope directly address your question for expanding on the definition of a program here. Data layer number 1 is exactly that. It's those programs. And so we define programs as a group of people working together to deliver a discrete service to identifiable users. Essentially, they tell the story of what you do. And so, there can always be kind of a back of the napkin calculation or running list, if you will, going on as you proceed through this training, to just essentially tell the story, talk about the things that you do as a department or as an individual. And, thinking about those services, what services do you deliver and who are the users? And that's ultimately the definition of what we would call a program. The benefits of having a program are, to be able to create transparency, start having discussions for trade-offs when we're thinking at the programmatic level. It's a lot more easy to contextualize and understand the trade-off and the service that you're having a discussion for, instead of thinking at that line item level. Sometimes it's a little bit less clear what the actual trade-off is or the impact of changing service levels. But with programs, it becomes a lot more transparent and a lot more easy to understand. Building on that further, then you're able not only to just have a trade-off discussion internally, but then provide comparisons to other service providers based off of, again, kind of the ability to use the program as a platform to understand the services that are being delivered. With programs, you're also able to better understand changes in the workforce, because you're able to understand where folks' time is being spent and where it may need to be changed in the future, but then also still just having that base platform of where it's going in the present is better used to inform the future. And last but not least, programs provide the benefit of clarifying the context and performance of any metrics associated. So it's really hard to put a metric on a line item, because you're not, exactly sure in all instances what it is or how to appropriately measure it. And certainly that's, it's difficult to appropriately measure program metrics as well, but with programs, it kind of provides greater clarity and context for those metrics overall. So these would just be some of the benefits. And, we'll walk through some examples here to think about how to kind of tangibly understand the definition of programs overall. So some questions to help think about, as you're trying to, even just the back of the napkin kind of jot down of an inventory, if you will, of the things that you do. It's really helpful to think about the services that you advertise. So something in this example, like recycling collection, is a good example of a program. It delivers, it's a group of people that work together to deliver a service to users, and it is advertised. Another great example of a question that helps kind of clarify or put some boundaries around what a program would be, or begin to look like what an inventory looks like, is thinking about who is benefiting from that. We have some external beneficiaries and we have internal beneficiaries. So there might be some things like adult baseball, which are might be something that you all offer as your Parks and Recreation, and you're able to have that benefit the external customer. But then there also may be some internal services that are performed, and you may benefit from those just as City of Tulsa employees, that you have copier and print services. You know, someone is delivering that service to you all, and we would want to track that. Even though it seems like, you know, it's just an internal audience, it's still really important to quantify or call out that particular program and say who benefits from this and who spends time doing it. Another great question to ask is, what do you do that is unique? So this is one of my favorite questions to ask. An example of this is youth workforce development. As Chris mentioned, I previously worked in the city of Greeley as an intern to help them with their program-based business intelligence. And I actually started my work with the city of Greeley as a result of their youth workforce development program. So I am sitting here today giving this training as a result of this particular program. And it's kind of cool, again, reinforcing what do programs do? They tell that story. This is a great story for me to tell. It's one I really enjoy telling. And it's really, you know, I would hope it's a pretty great story for the city of Greeley to be able to tell as well, that their youth workforce development has gone on to help a lot of different kids at the time grow up to become passionate about local government and participate in its, you know, various forms as well. Another great question to think about, you know, identifying programs overall is if you're mandated to provide a service or if you have to. So something like hazardous waste disposal, there is a certain mandate associated with how that service is performed. You have to handle hazardous waste a certain way. And therefore, you know, their resources are unique. The group of people who are trained to deal with that might be unique. And we should call it out separately as a program because it is particularly mandated to be provided by the city of Tulsa. And last but not least, we have the question to think about, is there a fee or grant associated? We want programs that do capture their own fees or grants. So an example, something like affordable senior housing, if you're thinking about a program overall and there is a fee associated that helps particularly fund that own program, so not necessarily, you know, when we're thinking about something like taxes, you know, those taxes don't generally, they're not a program, but there might be something where, again, kind of thinking about affordable senior housing, there's a grant for that. And so that program then kind of has its own expenses and its own revenue. So, you know, always trying to think at the programmatic level, if there is a fee or grant associated with the service, we would want to capture that as well. So when we think kind of quickly about summarizing what programs are now, I know that's kind of a crash course, but essentially they describe the services provided by Tulsa and they serve as the foundational data layer to tell stories. Does anyone have any questions with programs generally?
Yeah, this is Hannah who had the initial question. I think that really helped to break down how you define programs, but we've also had a lot of discussion recently around our key work processes that are sort of those high level services that we provide versus breaking those down to a really deep level. So I'm kind of curious, how far down do you break down when you're talking about programs? Is there
a classic question,
a best practice to how far down you're going to drill?
This is a classic question and a great one to ask. Thank you, Hannah. We see it in every community. What's the Goldilocks level of program, as I like to call it? What is too big and what is too small? So my kind of cop-out answer is that you all, the city, have to decide. I can, of course, provide a lot of guidance and say, you know, traditionally we see this as a program, whereas this might be too big. An example might be, you know, I was doing work with a city in Ohio, and their Parks and Recreation department had each of their particular special events called out. So they had a program where they have women in the city are just able to like kind of subscribe or join this particular program, and they're able to just take a walk once a month, just together as a community members, the city, the Parks and Recreation offers this program, and they had that specifically called out. And they realized as they were kind of allocating their costs, this program looks way more expensive than it actually is, as we were trying to allocate costs to it and things like that. So then they realized that they actually just are going to roll that up into what they call special programming. So instead of having each individual program, they're just going to have special programming and have, you know, the description of that particular program be captured under, you know, under the specific special programs that they offer, this Women Out Walking program as well as others. And so as a city, they really determined in terms of that foundational data layer to tell stories, that the story of this Women Out Walking program was not being told accurately or adequately, and they decided to roll it up based off of the story that they wanted to tell and the guidance from their city leadership and their department director. So, you know, kind of like I said, that first answer is you all are going to have to decide a little bit the degree of detail that you want, but there's also a lot of room for guidance and input from ResourceX. And the process itself of creating programs, allocating costs to programs, and scoring programs is going to naturally refine and kind of shake out what the Goldilocks size of programs is.
Jacqueline, I
Yeah.
do have a question. I don't know if you saw my hand or not on there.
I did.
Okay, but anyway, here's when you were talking about those aspirational projects, that is achieving tomorrow's level, was the allocation or the reallocation of resources for those projects within their existing budget, or do you know?
Great question. Kalamazoo is a unique one. Kalamazoo actually had a lot of local philanthropists donate a fair amount of money. They had a nice windfall come through for those aspirational projects. So some of those did come from the reallocation of future budgets to go toward those aspirational projects, but they were also a lot of that money was generated from local philanthropy.
Okay.
Just a lot of donations.
Yeah, thank you.
I particularly like that question because we'll use this slide again and again, the blueprint that Jackie had shown earlier, and there are two components of that blueprint, and I'll talk about this even more tomorrow. One is freeing up and reallocating the current resources that you already have. That's a great treasure trove of resources to fund the future. And the second one is continuing to generate new resources from outside of the organization. And so that's what's particularly inspiring about Kalamazoo is they're maximizing both of those streams, repurposing current resources and generating substantial philanthropic dollars, which is great.
Thanks, Chris. So that's kind of quite, you know, programs overall, and we will certainly provide time for greater exercise of the concepts overall. But, you know, moving into what data layer 2 looks like here. Want to talk a little bit, again, as I mentioned, you know, when we think about programs, it gets refined and further contextualized as we move on to the other data layers. So the second data layer that we typically see is allocating costs to those particular programs. Essentially, what this means is you have a list of, you know, line item data, and you have now a list of programs. If you were to imagine your program inventory would be created. And what we do is we, you know, take those line items and we allocate those line items to programs. So an example of this in a pretty quick and dirty way is, you know, thinking about first off what we do is we start with the positions in your line item budget. And we allocate a % of that position's time to each particular program that they work with. So in this example, we have a budget director and budget analyst. They spend 40% of their time on budget monitoring in this particular example, 10% on investment and cash management, 5% on interdepartmental training, you know, so on and so forth. And as a best practice, we traditionally try to allocate in multiples of 5%, no less than 5, and otherwise, just generally, we don't necessarily want a time study. We just want an accurate representation of how positions' time gets spent as it relates to programs overall. So that's why we try to stick around to those multiples of 5 allocations. And then after we kind of allocate the personnel time, then we have these non-personnel line item expenses to allocate as well. So the practice for that is allocating first by the direct dollar amount. So if we think for annual fees and services, there might be some instances where we have contracts associated. We know the full dollar of that contract and we know what those contracts go to in terms of the programs that they support. But then there also might be instances where we don't know exactly where this line item goes. We have the ability to allocate expenses by the full-time position associated, or just spreading it across evenly across all programs, or by percent. So to say, 10% of this overall dollar amount of this expense goes to budget monitoring and the other 90% goes to investment and cash management, as an example. So we have a lot of different options for how to allocate those non-personnel expenses. But the big focus is actually, in terms of costing overall, is that it's an opportunity to assess where the most valuable resource is spent. And I had someone ask me this question of, what is our most valuable resource? And my argument time and again would be that it is the way your personnel time is being spent. In most cities, personnel is the larger percentage of the budget overall when we think, in terms of line items. Is it wages or is it a series of non-personnel expenses? It's usually wages. And of those wages, that time is really how we're going to capture how it's spent overall. We have that best practice, as I mentioned, of allocating by time in the 5% mark, and then looking at all known or direct dollar non-personnel allocations first. And Hannah, this goes to your question too. Once we go through the costing process, you're able to see a little bit more easily if the size of the program isn't too big or too small based off of the cost allocation of that program. So traditionally, we see if the cost allocation to a particular program represents more than 50% of that department's budget, we should likely break that program out into a series of other programs. Because, if more than 50% of your budget is going into one program, I want to know a lot about what that program is or does, and it's not exactly telling that story as well as maybe breaking it out a little bit would be. At the same time, on the concept of too small, if a program is representing, again, probably less than 5% of your budget, it might be too small, and it might be appropriate to roll up a series of these so that it is representing at least 5% of the department budget overall. Amy, putting in the chat here, City Council hyper focuses on budget line items, and our biggest investment is always in personnel resources. Yeah, and so if City Council is focusing on those budget line items, these programs give you an opportunity to change the language and to change the platform for conversation, to look more at that where elected officials should be looking at that policy level. Are there any questions associated with the costs overall? I know it was kind of a brief overview, and we'll have time in the tools to look at what this actually looks like, but conceptually, is this making sense to everyone?
This may be getting down to the weeds too far, but I know, I think Keith is on the call, but I know he'll ask, about sort of what about these sort of indirect costs? This will, I'm sure, come up sort of like the support costs that go along with providing and maybe an externally facing program. You don't have to get too far into the weeds on that, but I know that will, come up at some point.
Yeah, James, thanks for asking. I don't think it's necessarily too far in the weeds, or at least the way I'm going to answer it is the fact that you do have the ability to allocate any position to programs and to any program in the entire city's inventory overall. So I think that speaks a little bit to your question in terms of being able to capture some of those indirect or more hidden costs, because if I'm spending, if someone spends 5% of their time on a program, we see this a lot for IT. Maybe, someone in IT is spending 5% of their time on, a budget development program, just because they're ensuring the application for that budget program is, it's running properly and functioning and all those types of things. That's a cost of that program you may not otherwise consider. And so that then, with this particular methodology, you're able to allocate that person's time to that program and capture that cost that is somewhat hidden at the moment. I think this also speaks to what we were talking about in terms of the interrelatedness of working in neighborhoods and streets and police. All of you would be able to, again, allocate your time to any of those particular programs and any mixture that accurately depicted the way that a position's time or the way that a line item was being spent. And so again, we're kind of able to think interdepartmentally a little bit more with those programs. And it does, in the same way, then capture some of those hidden or indirect costs.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to kind of this data layer number 3. We're looking at scoring programs, and we have this represented in 2 different ways. We have attributes and results. So when we think very quickly about program attributes, we have a series of 5 basic program attributes that come somewhat standard from ResourceX. They are the degree of mandate of the program, the degree of reliance on the program, the cost recovery of the program, the percentage of population served by that particular program, and the overall demand for that program. You can kind of see here we have we usually operate on what we call a simplified scale. So most programs are scored at a 0, 2, or 4. So kind of looking here for mandate as an example, if we have a program that is not legally mandated that we provide it, it would receive a score of 0. If it is mandated somewhere, internally, there's a self-mandate, whether that be in your charter or ordinance, that would receive a score of 2. And then there's a federal or state mandate, it would receive a score of 4. Just as an example, that would be kind of just how to think about this table here overall. However, with that said, there's always room for customization for these particular definitions associated. This is what comes standard from ResourceX, but it makes a lot more sense, and we find a lot more success with using these basic program attributes when folks at the city of Tulsa are able to kind of dig into these and customize these to represent overall what you all want to see from every program in terms of attribute assessment. So you have the ability to go, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you have the ability to further, define what is cost recovery here, for example. So, those are kind of basic program attributes overall. The big thing to note here is that they are attributes, exactly that. They are characteristics of a program that are assessed for every program in the inventory. So, really when you're thinking about basic program attributes, we want to think about the things that you want to know about every single program. So kind of in a little bit more detail, again, when we're thinking about the basic program attributes that come standard from ResourceX, we would absolutely recommend that you can refine those basic program attribute definitions and communicate those to your organization so that it's meaningful to you when you begin your analysis. Like I said, community and governance programs, so internal and external programs, are assessed against attributes, and they're kind of scored on this 0, 2, 4 or 0, 4 scale. So they are, again, just something that all programs get assessed against. And when we think about that, we're thinking ultimately about what it is that we want to know about every single program, regardless of it is internally facing or externally facing. When we start then thinking about that nuance, that difference of internal versus external programs overall, that's when we get into what we call these results of your governance, basically. And so we have what we call community and governance results. Essentially what these represent are externally facing results that you want to provide for the community of Tulsa, as well as then we have governance results, which are results that you want to provide or see for the internal organization, the employees of the city of Tulsa. So just again, kind of that difference. One is externally facing, that's community. One is internally facing, that's governance. And when we think about these results overall, they answer the question, why are we in business? When I was working in Greeley, we didn't call these results, we called these the whys of government. Things like, why does government exist? To provide public safety. why does government exist? To provide sustainable infrastructure or a vibrant economy. A variety of these all working together to say, why are we in business? They're the results of the work that you all do. Likely, these results align with these organizationally guiding documents, or they're guided by, Results for America, your elected officials, a variety of other. They're things that organizationally we're all bought into believing, essentially, and they're usually long lasting. When we think about these results generally, and we're going to assess these programs against these results, thinking, okay, we have these programs have costs associated because we've tied our line items to them, and now we're going to tie these programs and these costs to our results. That is ultimately what puts the nice bow around the entire process to create a prioritized budget, because you're assessing the resources and the impact that these resources have in your community. So when I tried to do this in Greeley, my boss and I completely destroyed this whiteboard trying to figure out how this whole thing worked. It is truthfully process, or it is a process. Don't let this be you though. We have a really great way to work through the results creation process as well as the results scoring process. And last but not least, the results communication process, which is what we call a present PBB site. So this is a much more beautiful depiction of what my boss and I were trying to express on that whiteboard a few slides ago. And this is, standard from ResourceX. This is what we call a present PBB site. One of, again, those standard deliverables that we receive is being able for you all to assess your programs in kind of a visually appealing and beautiful way as it relates to all of the results that they impact, or any one of these results represented here by these different colors on these tabs. So, scoring, like I said, is a bit of a process. It's kind of a 4-step process, the first of which is defining those particular results. And then after you define those results, department representatives, similar to those on this call, would go through and score their programs against those results. Then we have a peer review process during which, the departments are not necessarily scoring their programs from a departmental perspective, but they are serving on peer review teams to score programs from a results perspective. And then we have a final review process. So I'll speak a little bit to these, each of these. First and foremost, again, looking at what the definition of those results and what that process looks like. So again, these results are outcomes that are used to measure a program's impact with the community or the organization. So they are, externally facing and internally facing, and we want a set of both of results. Thinking about those long-lasting outcomes that are expected from the city, and they're supported by definition. So like I said, some of the results of government might be, public safety, having a safe community. But a safe community can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So we have some definitions that really flesh out what it means to have a safe community in the city of Tulsa. And that, that would be then with a result and the subsequent definitions, that would be the complete package for community and governance facing results. So again, typically we see 2 different types of results, and they usually break out into 6 or 7 different results and subsequent definitions. So usually we see something related to the economy, community well-being, infrastructure and transportation, safety, something related to parks, recreation, culture, and education, and something related to the environment for community-facing results. Internally, usually we see something related to resource management, decision-making, communication, something related to the internal workforce, overall kind of legal compliance, leadership, and partnership. So these are usually, just general categories that we see for both community and governance results. But like I said, on top of these categories of results, we also have definitions that provide more detail, or they're those detailed components for what an organization must do in order to achieve a particular result. And we have these definitions associated in order to have consistent application for each result as programs are being scored. They need to be scored against a consistent interpretation, and that's what the purpose of these definitions are for. So again, using this example, I said we have a safe community here. There's a lot of different things for what a safe community could mean. The first is, how well does a program impact a community's ability to have a well-prepared and adequately staffed in order to enforce the law, offer protection, and proactively prevent crime. That's one definition. But the community safety is also impacted by a program's ability to plan for and provide timely and effective response to emergencies and natural disasters. And then another definition still is, the ability to develop and systematically implement standards that ensure safe design, construction, and operation of all public facilities. So, at first, when we're thinking about a safe community, we may narrowly zoom in on what public safety traditionally is interpreted as, police, fire, but it also is, the ability to plan for and react to natural disasters or emergencies. And it's also the ability for us to safely enforce, design practices and construction and the operation of all, public facilities. Safe community is not just, particularly public safety in the narrow sense of the term. It's a lot of different things working together. And so that is how we're able to assess programs, not just, those that seem, most easily aligned, but also the fact that there are a lot of folks on this call who would at least somewhat, even if indirectly, influence a safe community through the programs that they offer, even if they're not a police or fire department. So that's kind of the process of defining results. We take those results and then we get those definitions, and there's a series of conversations and trainings associated. But assuming we were able then to get a clear set of results complete, then we would go through the department scoring process, which looks as follows. Departments would essentially have all of their program inventory, and they would score each of their own departmental programs on that 0 through 4 scale for the degree of impact on the particular results and basic program attributes as they were defined. We have departments use their expertise about their own programs to score first, and then there's time in a remote workshop setting like this or something else where they're able to work with resource X hands-on in order to complete the task. And when all of that is said and done, what we would then transition to is, after department scoring, into the peer review process. So peer review teams are teams that score all programs of the city of Tulsa, so not just one department, but the entire program inventory according to one organizational result or basic program attribute. So whereas departments were scoring just their subset of programs against all results, peer review teams are scoring all of the programs against one result. So kind of, thinking the change, if you're thinking about it, we have results up here and programs, results kind of as columns and programs as rows. The difference is departments score horizontally, whereas peer review teams score vertically. So I hope that makes sense. Sometimes I'm a visual person, and that is an easier way to understand it overall. The beauty of these peer review teams is that you're able to get a lot of different perspectives. So these teams are intentionally set up to be cross-departmental and cross-functional, meaning that they're not just representing, those who are sitting on the safe community team are not just folks from public safety, from fire and police, but they're also from a variety of different departments that may not be the traditional public safety experts, but they become subject matter experts on the result and the definitions associated. And they're able to take their own expertise from the department perspective, sit on this peer review team, and assess all programs. So it really becomes something that is highly, there's a fair bit of personnel involved in doing a peer review process, but there is a lot of reward to it because everyone walks away learning something about what the organization does, and they didn't know that previously. And so in terms of kind of the benefits of peer review, like I said, everyone is able to walk away learning something outside of their own departmental silo. It provides a bridge to each of the department silos that sometimes happen in local government. And the peer review process also provides kind of a check and balance for the department score overall. So we're able to get quite a few eyes looking at the programs and the program scores. As well as, last but not least, if there is a discrepancy or difference between a department score and a peer review score, there's a final review scoring process where the leadership team is able to review and finalize scores and kind of decide on a final score between the two if there is a discrepancy. So like I said, when we look at kind of the scoring process overall, when we think about what it is, we have programs, we have the costs associated because we're tying the line item budget to those programs. And then when we're, thinking about the assessment of those programs to attributes and basic and results, this is when we ultimately are able to get a prioritized budget. We have, programs are scored against all community or governance results. So all externally facing programs are, faced against externally facing results. All internally facing programs are scored against internal results and basic program attributes. And of course, like I said, we have a department and peer review process in order to kind of double check each of the scores of programs. That was a lot of information. Scoring is our biggest and kind of most it's not complicated, but there is a series of steps associated. So it's kind of our most labor intensive process. Are there kind of any questions associated again with just, I know it was a lot of information, but just want to check in on the concept and the understanding. Hannah, this is a great question. Hannah put in the chat for anyone who maybe wasn't able to read it. Is there an opportunity for community input in scoring? Do you have cities engage citizens? This is a great question. Traditionally, the opportunity for community input, especially from a citizen perspective, is during the creation of those results and the definition of those results. Usually, you can go through a process of having a series of citizen committees or something like that to create the definitions and the results themselves. Or if they are something, that is, usually they're council approved. And if they're council approved, then, there is at least some representation of the fact that the council member is meant to be a representation of the city as well. It is kind of done city by city. I say that largely to say that, but for the most part, in the scoring process itself, we do not see citizens participate other than in that definition of the results. But we do have at least one city, the city of Fort Collins, that does actually have citizens engage in the scoring process. And they have one or two citizens sit on each of those peer review teams to kind of serve as, like you said, that kind of citizen engagement and that citizen perspective. One other thing I've heard some communities have the idea of doing, I don't know if you all have this, but some communities have like a citizen budget committee of some kind. And that citizen budget committee in other cities have served as one peer review team as well. So they've kind of represented the citizen from that front as well. They've had one peer review team full of citizens instead of Fort Collins having citizens on each peer review team as a different flavor of that citizen representation. Any other questions? Okay. In terms of kind of I'm going to do a quick summary here and then we can take a little bit of a break. But like I said, when we think about the process overall, it's just a series of data layers that build on top of each other, starting with programs as the fundamental or foundational building block for this organizational business intelligence. And then from that list of programs, we assign personnel time, measuring our most valuable resource, and it becomes kind of a catalyst for investigation for the cost of delivering services overall. Once you have those cost allocations, you're able to really dig into that data and start doing that data analysis for what it costs to deliver a service. And last but not least, with this third data layer, we have the attribute and result assessment. And this gives us the opportunity to align services to desired organizational attributes or results and or results. And the result of this is ultimately to be able to determine how impactful a service is, because we're scoring it again against all of these basic program attributes and organizational results. And each of these data layers then work together in order for us to kind of get a full program business intelligence to understand the process overall. I have a few more slides and I think we'll take a quick break here. just so we can get up, stretch, and walk away from the computer a little bit, which I think is important in this always Zoom all the time type meeting situation that we have going on. So when we think about timeline, traditionally we see the implementation of at least the data creation process take approximately 8 weeks to do. It's a little bit of flexibility here, but we usually recommend anywhere between 8 weeks to 12 weeks in order to implement the process. So kind of working from an 8-week timeline, the first layer, like I said, looking at program inventory, it's usually a 1-day workshop, and we have about a 1-week turnaround. So we have the training and then 1 week to implement that training. Then with the second data layer, again, same process, there would be a training for how to allocate those scores to programs and about 2 weeks to complete the process. Then looking at the beginning of this third data layer, we have, again, a training and then would be about 2 weeks to finish the scoring of programs against results and or basic program attributes. So those are kind of the big 3 data creation pieces. And then after that, we would introduce, on top of the departmental scoring, we would introduce the peer review process, which is again kind of a 1-hour training. And then we give folks 3 weeks, just because it does have a lot of moving people and a lot of moving parts. We give folks 3 weeks to finish that process because it is more people involved sitting on each particular peer review team. And then last but not least, we have a final review training, and that would be when we would consider all of the data kind of complete and ripe for analysis. So overall, I'll say here again, you can see this is also operating under the assumption that the results for the programs that would be scored against are already created and approved. So that, if we needed to go through that process for the results creation and definition, that would be, before we started this, even before data layer 1, we would want to have those results created and defined. And then kind of kick this whole process off with those already done. So again, we kind of have an 8 to 12 week determination here, with most of which is calculating simply for the data creation itself. But I think sometimes it's helpful, especially I know we have departments represented here on the call. It's helpful to hear what the timeline typically is and what the expectation of your time dedication would be. As well as what the organizational lift would be overall. We're trying to get however many departments working on this at once. There's plenty of time to do it, but it's nice to communicate up front. I'm gonna check this chat really quickly here. Kansas City uses a similar process and utilizes citizen engagement in their annual budget. Yeah, great point. As well, that there is, again, during this peer review process, if you wanted to, we would want, you have the opportunity or ability to get citizens engaged if you would like.
Jacqueline, a quick question on that, on that last slide. Typically, do you have cities of our size implement this, with every department all the way through like that? Or do you sort of have, a handful of departments do this and sort of perfect the process first?
That's a great question. Usually, and so I thought Kansas City, Missouri, I didn't want to assume, but I thought we were thinking about Kansas City, Missouri. We've had Kansas City, Missouri. They went through and did just their parks department first to go through this process and did kind of a pilot project, if you will. They started with that one department, and then if there was success, rolled out to the other departments based off of what they've learned. We're doing a similar methodology with the city of Denver. We're taking on their first, we call them the Big Six, their first 6 departments. And so that, they're not exactly on this 8-week timeline, just because of the, COVID posture has really changed the way that they were able to get things done. But overall, they did a somewhat similar process of having a subset of departments go through this exact kind of timeline here, and then if they wanted to, by the end of the Big 6 being done, have the opportunity to add, what we call Department 7+ as well. So either way is certainly an option. We've done it where, departments are kind of phased in one by one, or we've done multiple departments at once. Or, if we wanted to look at the whole city being done, we could do that as well. Chris, did you have anything to add there? I thought I saw your face.
I think you answered it perfectly. I think it's more common, James, that organizations do a citywide implementation, just so you have all the data together. Everybody's doing program inventory at the same time and costing and so on. But totally valid implementation approach, as Jackie outlined. Denver and Kansas City did it in a phased approach as well.
Great, thanks. I certainly see the pros and cons to both. I mean, you know, your slide about the silos, I think, is not fully achieved if you don't do it citywide. But I also see that it's a heavy lift and a completely different way of thinking about doing this, for everyone in the city. So I see the challenges of that. And I know we're going to talk about the culture change later on, but so anyway, I'm just trying to think through that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is Tammy. Do you guys ever have communities that look at, hey, we really want to focus on these primary service levels, regardless of what department? Because all I've heard you talk about is departments. And, in our beginning conversations, I think all the department heads that spoke about needing to go across layers with certain service levels. So I'm just curious if you've had any communities that say, we want to focus on, neighborhood improvements or, whatever they want to look at permitting, and then that goes across multiple departments, and then you pull in those that you need to have in to look at those service areas. Or is your methodology just looking at, we're going to look at these 5 departments and then have them outline, and you may not have everybody involved that may be participating in those, that contribute to those services?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say for the most part, we see traditionally that it is, so I say, department, it would be whatever kind of the organizational structure that you have. If department is your representation, that's fine. However, with that said, I don't see any particular methodological or conceptual hurdle by doing, by having that service level be the representative department or division or organizational level that we're looking at. It can be uploaded just as easily in the tools. That service level has a series of programs associated and a series of personnel and line items associated. We could go through the exact same process.
And Tammy, I'll chime in as well. I think it's, to your point, why we would more often advocate for a citywide implementation, and it's rare to see only a few departments going at the same time. Your permitting example is a perfect one. You might really wish to see across all departments who's involved in permitting, what sort of permits are they issuing, who has inspections, are they charging appropriate fees, do you have cost recovery? So to be able to see that comprehensively is definitely powerful.
This is Ben Harris. I also work in OPSI with Hannah and Dorita. I compared from your experience with other cities, what level of detail do they track costs?
Great question. I would say it kind of depends on the size of the city and the complexity of their budget. Traditionally, when we think about the level of cost being tracked, it goes down. Sometimes we see, if department is the larger one, then we see department division. We track traditionally to what we call just like an object or a line item. But we have the ability to add up to 8 different categories for line item and up to, I think it's 4 different categories for a position. So if there is that degree of detail, the degree of detail can exist and be tracked in the tools. Usually we see, again, kind of up to like 1 or 2 levels of detail in terms of category. So the line item could be, I don't know, the department division and then another category potentially. That would be usually like 2 or 3. And then same thing for position overall. Usually between two or three different categories, but we have the ability to do up to 8.
Okay, thank you. So from your experience, and I know Hannah hinted on this earlier about what level of granular detail we need to track. What level of detail do you feel like is necessary, like minimum level of detail necessary for this to roll up costs to program levels?
Great question. In terms of, what we need to be eventually unique is a position, the position number, either that or all the way down to, if the position sits, let's say, across multiple service levels, it sounds like, if we wanted to have that be represented, then it would, it would be, the position would be here, but the service level would be, the one level lower. And so in terms of minimum, we do need something that eventually tracks back to be a unique identifier for that particular line item or position overall. And like minimally tracking to a department level. However, it sounds like that would probably be far too large for you all. So then it would likely be, the division of the department and or even something further than that, if it might be a service level or something else.
So if we were to say that we only track it at the division level, how much additional effort would there be? At least from my perspective, this seems like a very challenging task to change culture so that we actually track detailed enough information so that we can roll it up to specific services that are cross-departmental. And additionally, because for us to make this sustainable, we have to be able to do this consistently and be able to track where the data comes from and validate that so that we can actually use that in the future.
Mm-hmm. I think, Chris, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jackie, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Then maybe some follow-up questions. I want to make sure I'm tracking with what you're thinking. I might be down the wrong path, but is the spirit of your question something along the lines of, this is a common question that we get asked, how precise are we tracking these costs, which can lead someone to start thinking, like, are we doing a time tracking system to track various staff members to their programs? And is this tying out from an accounting perspective to an actual budget with appropriation authority down to a program level? I'm trying to distinguish that what we're talking about here is less about everything I just cited in my example. That level of complexity, there's not a whole lot of bang for the buck in terms of time. If I were to track your time, okay, that's great. We're not talking about that, and it'll probably get clear as we get into the cost allocation tools themselves. But this is not like program-based accounting necessarily. And the best example I can give is, as Jackie was going through the cost allocation approach, and she was describing things like, hey, our best practice is don't worry about allocating anybody less than 5% of their total time, because really that's a level of precision that is less interesting for this work. If you have the data, great, all the power to you, but people's time fluctuates, and it's a planning exercise truly at its heart to guide management decisions on program change. And so think about this, we're only advocating as a best practice that most of our clients go through this exercise but once a year. And so even in that process of allocating someone's time, you're doing it to the best extent of your knowledge of where that time goes without time tracking. And why is that helpful, you might ask? It's helpful because I can look at my time. I have only so many working hours in the year, and I can give a general estimate knowing I might be a little bit off. But that's okay, because at the end of all this work, when we start to use the programmatic data to communicate about changes we might make, I really want to know, in general, where are our resources going, and is that where we want them to go? And if we talk about repurposing, I want to know, hey, Ben, you're spending approximately 10% of your time on a particular program that we're going to do less of, and therefore, in general, we're going to free up approximately 10% of your time or 5%, and we need to reallocate it towards something new we need to get into. That's how this program data is going to be used. And hopefully that's helpful as differentiated from, hey, Ben, you said you spent 6.9% of your time on this particular program and it was really 6.8. We need to sharpen that up. That's not the direction of this work.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm just really trying to find the balance between what you experience and as a consultant, where you're basically tracking every 15 minutes of your time so that you know your costs, versus what the city does, where we don't necessarily track individual allocation of time. And so I'm just trying to find out where the balance is between those two that would provide enough information for us to make better decisions. And that's what basically the spirit of the heart of my question is just trying to figure out that balance.
Mm-hmm. On the balance, we're far away from tracking down to 15-minute increments, and far more interested in, Ben, if you were to right now jot down the 20 programs that you participate in, or 10 or 5 or 50 or whatever they are, approximately where does your time go, so that we can start to see, is that helpful? And then as we evaluate those programs, and you're thinking about the future of those programs, you can say, wow, I had no idea that approximately 10% of my time, let alone several of my other staff, go to this particular program. We had boards and commission support in one of our California cities, and this might be a helpful example as well. From the council's perspective, they're saying, we have all these boards and commissions, but you're here anyway. What's the big deal? And staff was saying, well, there's a surprising amount of time that goes into our support for all of the different boards and commissions that we have. They had over 25 or something like that, which turned out to be laughable when we worked with Alexandria, Virginia. They had like 75. But when they added up all the increments of people's time, there's 5% of Ben's time, 10% of economic development director's time, it becomes something substantial that they really do want to look at and say, man, if we sunset even 1 or 2 of our boards and commissions, or at least met a little less frequently, we could really free up a decent amount of time, our most valuable resource, as Jackie's mentioned, to reallocate towards a lot of other high priority things that we have convinced ourselves we don't have time to do. That didn't take 15-minute time tracking to get to that conclusion. That is general estimates of where people's time are being devoted to board and commission support.
Chris, that is a great example. I'll just jump in on that because, I think that's something that we often just say, well, I know I go to boards and commissions multiple times a week, and I'm always kind of thinking about how many people are in this room, and what is the opportunity cost of their time just for the slight chance that they might be called upon, to answer one question every 6 months, and I think about that a lot because there's a lot of other important things that really need attention, and so I appreciate you bringing that up as an example. That's a really good one, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
So I just put in the chat, it might be helpful to think about, when we think about a 5% increment, it's approximately 100 hours of time. So, when we think about how granular do we go in terms of difference? It's about 2 weeks of dedicated hours to a particular program overall. And so I don't know, that might not be helpful, but it is traditionally some information that we give when we do the actual costing exercises. I'm going to go ahead and actually push through a few more slides, and then we'll get a break, and then we'll switch a little bit in order to see some of this in action in the software so that we can begin to conceptualize a lot of these great questions that we're having. So traditionally we would do this through, we would come up with each of these data layers through a series of interactive workshops that focus on each or multiple data layers at once. And then between each of these workshops and the next workshop, we would, hope for internet access, which is certainly helpful to have these types of workshops, as well as some homework to be able to be complete, and the potential for kind of interaction between multiple folks in the department in between each of the workshops as well. So those would be kind of things that we would need to ensure, but those are kind of detaily, so I'll skip through those pretty quickly. We also tomorrow will spend some time talking about what we would call project key to success. So in terms of, I know we have some department users here today, in terms of things that help ensure that the whole project is successful, not just from a super user perspective, or folks who are kind of guiding this initiative and managing the project, but also folks who are involved in it. We have a series of documents, the first called a project charter, that helps talk about, as a communication tool, why are you doing this, this implementation of program-based business intelligence? And it gives, those who are managing the project organizationally the ability to then pivot out and communicate to all the purpose of the project overall. And then other things that we'll talk about are, the ability to come up with an implementation schedule that works well, fits within your organizational needs, and, allows for the, timing that best fits for you all. And last but not least, a communications plan. So these are these are resources, these are documents that we provide. We'll talk a great deal more about tomorrow and in subsequent meetings, but just want to preface that for those on the call, we have the ability to talk, about not just the logistical aspects of PBBI, but also kind of the human or people side of things. And those are what we found to be hugely important to successful implementation. So this is my kind of hard stop slide to make sure that any outstanding questions are answered. We'll take a little bit of a break, maybe at least 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:45 maybe. And then I'll guide you through jumping into the software so we can get some hands-on experience.
Jacqueline, do you, I had put out an initial email and I just want to clarify. So I think this group, we had sort of the mayor's office and department heads. Do you want all those folks to stay on for this next module or just the super users?
They are more than welcome. I made users for everyone. Everyone on the call is able to get in to the software. Sometimes I think it is helpful for department users to be able to see what might be expected of them during the cost allocation phase, during the program scoring phase. But I understand, this is not everyone's full-time job. It's just mine. So if there are a lot of competing interests on folks' time, as we talk about it being our most valuable resource, it is going to be recorded. So it might be something that if they need to go do something else, they can always watch again.
Okay, great. I'd welcome everyone to stay if they can, but certainly understand if there's other competing schedule needs.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and take a quick break, camera off, walk away a little bit. I think it's important to do that during Zoom meetings. And then we'll be back again at 10:45. said today, some of the focus that I want to spend the last hour or so on is being able to get you all some access into the tools themselves. So I have a bunch of slides here that I'm actually, you always have access to these, but I'm going to skip through these just again so that we have the ability to look at the tools itself, and you always again have the chance to reference back to those as needed. So when we think about kind of jumping into our software, this is what it looks like in terms of a screenshot. So I'll stay on this slide for a little while, but would invite everyone to go to this link here, https://onlinepbb.net. So I'll put that in the chat here again. And again, you should be able to see that same screenshot that I showed. And I have this icon here. It's kind of as a reminder. Our software works best in Google Chrome. If you are using Firefox or Safari, that's fine too. Internet Explorer, there might be some things that don't work as well, but at the end of the day, we'll still try to get as much benefit out of it as possible. Again, and moving forward though, Chrome is the best thing to use. So you should see this kind of login here. You'll be able to log in using your @cityoftulsa.org email address with a password welcome. If for some reason that doesn't work for you, that's okay, totally natural at this stage of the game. There are always one or two that show up that I didn't have a chance to make a username for or something like that. So we have some generic ones made as well. So if your username or if your email doesn't work in this password, please feel free to put that in the chat, and some Resource X staff, or myself included, will be able to give you a different username and password to use and log in for kind of just the trial run that we're using here. And for folks who are on the call representing Result for America, you also have the ability to use your Result from America or For America email, and same password as welcome. You have the ability to log in. It's just a play site. Everyone can play today and learn some new things. So with that said, if you're following along and able to get into the software, I'm actually going to then change my screen. I'm going to move away from looking at the slides. So again, you can always reference back to them. I'm actually going to also take the same view you all will see if you're actually able to log into the tools. So I am going to switch my share here and share the screen here. Hopefully you all are able to see the tools overall, this same software that you should be able to see. If you were to log in, there might be some differences. For those who were able to log in, it might not say all available for you. It should just say one of the particular department representative groups here today. And mine would say all available. For Results for America people, it also says all available. You can just pick one. And again, please feel free to put in the chat if you're not able to successfully get in, and we'll get you in. But I did kind of a quick exercise, or I kind of constructed a quick exercise. So if you're able to see the program inventory the department that is relevant to you. So let's say, for this example, I work in finance. The first thing I would want or charge is kind of a challenge to each of you is, again, the first place we start is looking at this program inventory. So when you select this program inventory, I have a set of preloaded programs here. In this case, there are 5 of them. There are usually anywhere between 5 and 10, depending on the department. And we talk a lot about what is the right size of the program and what is the right program, what is a good program, so on and so forth. And so for each of you, I'd like to spend some time I would like you all to spend your time looking at this program inventory. And like I said, I have some preloaded programs in here that may describe some functions that you do based off of what I read online. And I've put some Easter eggs in there. There are at least 2 programs in your program inventory, in the sample inventory that I've made for you here, that may not fit the definition of a program as we've outlined it. So I want to spend some time, give everyone an opportunity to look at their particular sample program inventory and give everyone the opportunity then to maybe assess which programs should not be in the program inventory. So it's been about 60 seconds using this kind of finance program inventory as an example. Did anyone from finance find the one or two programs that I put in here that maybe shouldn't be in here? They're not the right size of program, or they don't fit the definition of a program.
Seems like posting bids online is a little narrow.
Yep. So you found one Easter egg. Great job. You're exactly right. It is like exactly as you said. So I was going to say, why do you think it's not the right program? Like you said, it is too narrow. It doesn't describe, it doesn't describe any service being done to a specific set of users. It's just a task. And so it doesn't necessarily fit that definition of a program because it is too narrow, exactly as you said. Anyone else find an Easter egg maybe not in finance? I put one in every department, or one or two in every department. So if we look here, I'm going to look. So, the second Easter egg in finance is not only this posting bids online, but also kind of the other bad program is this analysis to arrive at sound business decisions, improve policies and practices, processes as it relates to enterprise-wide software systems. So this is a real program from a client before they kind of went through and refined their program inventory. I didn't make this up. This came from an actual client. Let's talk about this. First off, it doesn't have a description. And if you can't describe the program, probably indication number one, we're looking at not the right program overall. This probably sounds a fair bit more like a description than a program name itself. And then I would ask, and I did ask the user who made this program, what is the purpose? What is the service that's trying to be delivered when we're looking at the analysis to arrive at sound business decisions, improve policies, practices, and processes as it relates to enterprise-wide software systems? So, probably this deserves to have a little bit of a tweak for the description and needs to be renamed something like internal policy control for finance itself. And we need to talk about, business analysis, policy, improving policies and practices, and then ensuring that the enterprise-wide software systems indeed kind of fit that bill for internal control. The first item seems broad. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Anne. It is very broad. It's not clear what service is actually being described. So this also would be something that we would call, it's too broad of a program. So whereas this one was too narrow, posting bids online, this one is too big. It describes too much. It's not clear what service is being delivered. I'm going to pick at least one more. Let's pick police. I put in a few here. I put in 9. Was anyone from police able to identify programs that shouldn't be there? And even folks who aren't from police, you're able to see using my screen, you can see, is there anything that doesn't fit necessarily?
This is Sherry with police. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Sherry.
Hi. I see a few, or at least a couple.
Yeah.
One is obtaining and relaying medical call information that originates inside the city of Joplin or Newton County, unless the city is not a valid variable that I'm supposed to ignore.
Yeah, no, I think that's great too. So if you had two options, then, if you could just update that. And I did leave that in there intentionally. Exactly. This is from a different city. So you would want to make sure that your descriptions apply to your own city, and there might be instances where they don't. Did you have anything else?
The customization of computer programming, identifying needs that cannot be handled via enterprise application within the IT realm. However, we actually do that sometimes. So, but I think that's something it's probably not a primary program for us.
Mm-hmm. That was another Easter egg in there. So you're doing a great job kind of identifying what should or shouldn't be. And like you said, maybe it is something you do, but certainly it would need at least, and you have the option here, if you wanted to hit this update button, you could tweak this, you could change the program name, you can change the program description, and then you could hit save changes in order to better reflect what it is that you were trying to say. And in the case where you said, this is something we do, but I'm not sure we would want to outline it. I'm not sure we spend enough time dedicated to a whole program for it. Then you might just want to have it be captured in another program description somewhere. Great question, or great points. Thank you all for participating. If anyone has any other points that they want to bring up, or programs that they saw that didn't belong in their program inventory, please let me know. You can put it in the chat. But kind of for the sake of ensuring that we're seeing all different parts of the software, I want to look a little bit about program costing now. And so when we look at, again, if we were here in this program inventory, you all saw me just go up to the top where it says main menu, and then I hit home. That takes us back to the main dashboard. And hopefully at this time, you're able to learn not just the concepts, but also see these in action in the software itself. So again, speaking of, now we're going to look at program costing. This is this multi-gear icon. I'm just going to select that. It's going to take a second to load, but it'll load some sample personnel and non-personnel data here. So when we think about, the first task that we have everyone go through is their personnel time. And so what this, in order to practice an allocation, let's say, you just simply select this personnel bar and it'll drop down to show a series of sample positions that I've put in there for you to just practice. Again, this may not reflect completely accurately, but you have the opportunity to be able to practice the time allocation overall from a personnel standpoint. So I already picked on police. I'm going to pick someone else. Let's say, I'll pick working in departments here. Same exact thing. I'm just selecting that personnel, and we have some different positions represented here. So let's just say, I think he's on the call still.
Dwayne or
Yep.
Marshall, either one.
Dwayne, are you still on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call. I just can't log in, so I'm at a disadvantage here, but I've been hearing you. So
okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I see your screen.
Perfect. So this is you, right? The director of working in neighborhoods?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's pretend to allocate your time. So I'm going to click on this here. Just for those of you who can log in, again, you can see the software. I'm just selecting that small black gear icon that shows up when I hover. There's this pop-up here. So Dwayne, if you were to think about how to allocate your time, some of these programs, this isn't representative of the full program sample that you have, but if you were to think about where your time goes, do you have any time kind of for any of these programs as they're outlined here?
You say me personally, or how much the time that the department spend in those areas?
That's a great question. So we're looking at you personally for your particular position title here.
Yeah, I can look at allocating, looking at what's going on here. I have to say, let me preface this. I think I'm one of few departments with only one manager 4 divisions, but 1 manager because of some earlier budget decisions, not based on priorities, priority-based budgeting, but some earlier priorities where I don't have managers. So I serve in a dual role sometimes because I have supervisors functioning very efficiently and effectively as managers, but they're actually supervisors. So I have to manage them as well as try to manage the full department. So that kind of skews my time. And the only manager I had is no longer here. So, and I have someone serving in an interim capacity in that. So I'm looking at the immediate time. So I think right now I can truthfully allocate like 25% of my time for animal shelter. I have about 25% of my time dealing with nuisance ordinances. And then I think that rest of it would be split between housing and neighborhood enhancement and revitalization and kind of housing issues. So that's how I would allocate, if that's what you're looking.
I think that's great. Yeah. So again, simply, I'm just saying, okay, so 25% of your time here, 25% of your time here, and then you said the remainder would go to neighborhood enhancement, revitalization, and some housing programs.
Yeah, and I could split that out, drill it down even more if necessary.
Absolutely. If you wanted to, you could say, I want to put 10 here, and I want to put 5 here, and I want to put 5 here.
Right.
And so again, so this, for the sake of exercise, we'll be able to see here. This little red area showing 0% allocated will change to then show 95% allocated because I'm bad at math. I'm just going to adjust one of these just to show what 100% allocation looks like. So then there we go, okay. 100% allocation. But again, as you said, you always have the opportunity as you're going through, you might say, actually, as I'm trying to allocate my time, there's a program that's missing.
Yeah.
And so then you can always close out of this and then go back to that program inventory and then go ahead and add a program. And then go back to adjust your time allocation here and, talk about ensuring that all of the programs do represent the way that your time is being spent. So again, I kind of point this out just so we can see quick examples of what personnel allocation and time allocation looks like. But then also I think, reinforcing Hannah's question of what is the right program, what is the right size of program. And I said it kind of gets refined as you go through the process. We can see, as you just said, Dwayne, that there are some programs that are probably missing as you're trying to allocate your time. So, when we go through and get this quick sneak peek of what time allocation looks like, I think that helps further provide even further context for what a program is or isn't and what programs should be in your program inventory.
I have a quick question. I also work in neighborhoods, and I was wondering, as you updated that, my screen didn't update.
Great question.
In typical, would it update throughout the program?
So it would. It will update as soon as you refresh your browser.
Okay, that makes sense.
And any changes you made, if you've gone in and just messed around with one or two of these just to see the process of allocating time, and I were to refresh my browser, same thing, I would see the changes that you have made as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
I had a question.
Yeah.
As far as allocating costs, can you allocate a cost based on the size of a section or division?
In terms of
let's say Dwayne's time, and using that as an example, could he not just allocate his time based on the size of the budget for each one of the divisions?
He could, if I pulled them up again, if he were to say, the size of the budget, let's say the budget represents, animal shelter, like the animal shelter represents 5% of the budget. Therefore, he thinks he spends 5% of his time there. He could certainly change this from 25 to 5.
Okay.
It would just, whatever percentage you put in here, it will accept to add up to 100%. However, if that felt like the accurate way to represent your time, that's fine. But do remember, like the process itself is us trying to get a picture of how time is being spent. And if it is proportionally spent to where the budget is, that's great. If it isn't, then that's really what we try to unlock here in this process as well.
Okay. I'm just having a hard time identifying zero time. He's representing the entire department. So consistency is what I'm concerned with.
Mm-hmm. So if there, and we do see this somewhat often with directors of this kind as well, as you were talking about, it might make sense, like you said, especially for directors, to not have any zeros associated. So if I were to change this again to say, I'll change this one back to 5 here. I'll go ahead and update it. It will switch us to 95% allocated, but we still have zeros right here.
Okay.
We have the ability, this is getting kind of detailed, but we have the ability to hit this evenly button, and it will allocate the remainder of his time, that 5%, evenly across the remaining programs.
Yeah, and since none of the departments are tracking times, or very few of them are actually tracking their time, it seems like an easier approach for a department head just to allocate costs based on the size of each one of the sections or divisions.
Yeah, so certainly there are a couple different ways to do that, but that's a great point. We have, the ability to spread evenly or spread by the percentage of the division. And again, if I were to hit update, we would see that change, and there would be no zeros here.
All righty, thanks.
Yeah, great questions. Any others?
I noticed that position numbers are listed when you click on the different titles.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just so that each person is tracking their allocation of what they do?
So that's a great question. I made the position, they're random, but I made these position numbers so that, like I said, eventually we need to get a place where each line in the system is unique. And of course, there are instances where, this is a great example. There are 2 code investigator ones. That's one position title, but 2 folks work in that position. We have the option here to allocate both of them, or we have the option to only allocate one of them. So we can allocate both of their time at once. This might be helpful for folks like fire and police, or they have multiple patrol officers or firefighters doing the same thing. You can get all of their allocations done in one fell swoop. But there might be instances where these individual code investigator ones do different types of code investigation. So their time is spent differently, in which case we would be able to allocate only this position number 36, and then we can deselect and then allocate only this position number 37. So that would be the difference in that use of that position number overall, is when it is not appropriate to allocate by the position title, but instead by the position number. That's where that would come into play and be more helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if folks are following along or just kind of viewing on my screen, we also have the option to allocate some non-personnel. These are just sample kind of line items here, looking at materials and supplies, other services and charges. And then we actually do, I saw in your budget that you had operating capital. We would definitely need to have a conversation about what this operating capital exactly means. Usually we don't have capital in the tools itself, but if it is part of your operating budget, then it would go to contributing to the total cost of programs. So these are just some quick examples overall. It'd be the exact same thing if we were looking at the materials and supplies. You just select this little gear icon, and then be able to allocate the dollar amount instead of the time. So again, we're in this column now, we're thinking of not necessarily in percentages of time, but rather in dollars overall. So, you know, that would be the difference here. We would be able to say, you know, we have $100,000 going here, and, you know, $100,000 going here, and then 43,000 over here, and another 1,000 over here. Let's see where that gets us. So that would be an example of how this whole the dollars allocation works. We do have some other options as well, but that's just a quick view of what it could look like. I will go ahead and close out of this unless there are other questions as it relates to the non-personnel allocation. And then I will go ahead and change to talking about some two quick questions overall as it relates to, again, just thinking about the allocation process. As you all, you know, some of the larger departments are represented here. Do you all think that you have time to do this allocation process?
This is police. I think it's going to be challenging, but we can definitely do that.
I agree. I think at least we could try, you know, I mean, are you talking about as an exercise for today or tomorrow? I'm just curious.
Just, you know, generally, if you were to, you know, if you were to have, not necessarily today, there's, you know, you don't have to finish this by any means. I just wanted you to be able to try it and see how it works. But with that view, do you think this is an exercise that could be reasonably expected of you and completed should the city of Tulsa kind of move forward with priority-based business intelligence generally?
Yes, but I think it's going to take some time because, you know, it's changing the whole mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to have the flexibility to go in and tweak it some, because what you think may be a percentage or a specific allocation may need to be tweaked as you move through the process and go back through. So you just have to have that kind of flexibility at this point. But, you know, I'm all for trying.
Yeah, it seems like there'd be a lot of work, like most things. There's a lot of work in setting the, you know, initial baseline there and going in. There's probably, and I keep trying to look on mine, but every time I've signed myself out like 10 times because I hit the back, you know, the back arrow and keep forgetting that signs me out. So once I forget, I remember to do that right, I will be able to look more in depth. But there are all kinds of things I do that aren't listed there. So, you know, I think one of the things that it would sort of force you to do initially is think about, okay, how much time do I spend responding to city council and, you know, requests like that, or other sort of things that don't necessarily fit into any of these categories, and yet you have to do, and you want to assess the, kind of like your earlier comments about the authorities, boards, and commissions, you know, responding to that work may not be listed under here already, but once you start figuring out all the things that you are spending time on and putting them in, it may completely change our perspectives. But I think creating that framework initially would be very time consuming, but it's essential to do it right and not just go, oh, well, this isn't reflected, so I'll lump it over into this other category, because then it kind of skews everything afterward. But you probably could do that for the department as a whole, you know, assess some of those things that are happening that aren't listed, and then go through with each of those programs or each of those individual personnel and allocate it. You just would I think have to really put in the homework in the beginning to make sure you have all the right categories there. But I can see just that process, not even analyzing it, but just that process being really useful to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Building off what Anna was just saying, I come from the nonprofit world where it's very common to have program budgets as well as dedicated portion of the budget actually as overhead. Is that something that is typically seen in this piece where there's some of those miscellaneous costs and responding to different things that is classified as overhead, or is the goal to allocate every single dollar to the program budget?
It's a great question. So we could handle it a couple of different ways. We could handle anything that is kind of miscellaneous. As you may have noticed, you know, I would imagine that's kind of a non-personnel thing. We do have some additional buttons to use for non-personnel. We try as hard as possible to have those dollars be directly allocated to programs whenever it's known. There are instances when it's not known, and because of that, we have these easier buttons to be able to allocate. I can easily allocate this $201,000. I can just spread it evenly across all programs as one specific example. Or if that doesn't feel necessarily accurate, but there is some, you know, some portion of this goes to, if this is a miscellaneous expense, I know some portion of this goes to, I don't know, let's say 10% here, and I know 10% goes here. I know 20% goes here, and 40 goes here, and another 10% goes here. I'm just making this up.
Jacqueline, I think we're not seeing the screen that you're on. I'm sorry. I'm seeing anyway, like your Dropbox screen.
Let me see. Thank you for that. Let's see here. How about now?
That's perfect.
Okay. So let me go ahead and thank you for that. Let me go ahead and reset. So we have the ability, if this weren't, you know, if this weren't operating capital, but instead just miscellaneous expenses, we have the ability to spread them evenly. And you can just kind of see the even spread to say there's miscellaneous expenses, they go to supporting all of these programs evenly. That might be one appropriate way to do it. Or it might be more appropriate to say, you know, there's a percentage of this that we know is a miscellaneous expense. We know a percentage of it goes to, you know, goes to this particular program or set of programs. I could then go ahead and hit percent and then spread the rest of it evenly. So there are a variety of different ways to deal with those miscellaneous expenses, that overhead. And by and large, we would say that it's probably best to get it to be allocated when it is supporting a program, even if indirectly. However, there are also instances where it just doesn't make sense to be included in the program allocation. We have also the option to exclude costs from being allocated to programs, and then it wouldn't have to go through this process at all. And that would be something we would talk, you know, as an organization to ensure it's consistently applied across the board, and getting, you know, the true cost of a program the way that you want it to be represented.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious to, I don't know if Janet is still on the call or Chief Baker, but I mean, that's the other kind of large department, you know, the fire department. Thinking about, you know, what the fire department does in its budget. I don't know, Chief Baker or Janet, if you're still on, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the, you know, on Jacqueline's question regarding sort of what it would take to implement this. They may not be on the call any longer. I see Janet still, but.
Well, they can get back to us, certainly.
Yeah, sure.
So kind of last piece here that I wanted to point out, again, if we're navigating, you know, don't hit that back button, hit that main menu button and then home. That's how we can get somewhere else. I'll go ahead and again, let's pick the mayor's office this time. We have the ability to go ahead and look at program scores. And so at this moment, I just have attributes loaded in here, but of course we have the ability, as we've talked about to great length, the ability to add specific community and governance attributes for internal and external assessment as well. So this is rather simple in terms of, process and execution, exact same thing. You would just click on the red bar, just as we did with those cost allocations as well, and then go through, saying, what is the demand for this particular program? What is the demand for the mayor's office in this example on communications? Is it increasing, decreasing, or flat? And then, let's say it's increasing, we would plug in the associated score that you can see up here into this particular score column. So on and so forth, for each of the programs represented here. Then when we were all done, or at any point, we can just hit Save Changes and go ahead and close out. So that's kind of the concept of scoring overall. I know this is definitely the easier when we just look at costing and then compare it to scoring. Scoring looks much easier. If, for example, we wanted to, if many of these, let's say administrative cost is flat, but many of these are increasing, then we can, you have the ability here to kind of drag and drop, except for a few of these, so it does go by much faster than the allocations themselves, which do require quite a bit of detail. And like everyone was saying, the intentionality to get right, but also the flexibility to look between, multiple different cost allocations. Same thing here, if there were, if, you have the ability at any point to change these scores after it's been saved, so on and so forth. So there is quite a bit of flexibility in the process overall. And then when you're all done, it just goes to a green bar, just as you saw with this cost allocations as well. So that's kind of from a methodological standpoint, what it looks like to score against these basic program attributes. What I think would be much more interesting for us to discuss or have time to talk about here is, like we've talked about, I think a little bit, first off, we have the ability to think about what these basic program attribute definitions are, what they mean for the program. So, if you think about here, potentially, I'm going to pick on mandate in this case. Are there instances where you would want to know more than what is listed here for a particular program? Would you want to know, if there is there a gradient or a gradation between self-mandate and no mandate that you want to know? Maybe it's not legally required that you do it, but it is an internal best practice. Do we want to have that called out specifically? And is that something that's appealing when we think about what we want to know about every program? Or more generally, I guess, in terms of something we can discuss, because I guess that was kind of a specific example. Is there something that we do want to know about all programs? So one example of this, if it's kind of tricky to think up, what would you want to know about all programs, maybe in addition to the things that are listed here? We've worked quite a bit with the city of Denver and others as well as time has gone on, even before this most recent 2 months. But many folks are now very interested in the way each of their programs impact equity as it is organizationally defined. So if you wanted to, you could have an equity program attribute, and you could assess programs based off of the definitions and the way that they impact equity, as an example. So when you think about, okay, those are the types, that may be one example of types of things that you would want to know about all programs, and that you could put into this type of system, where you could imagine, it would say, equity would be in addition to these 5, or we could remove one of these or 2 of these and then have equity in addition, or as a replacement. Or maybe it's not equity, maybe it's something else for Tulsa that's very interesting. Maybe it's environmental impact, or whatever it is. I know that the city of energy, there might be something that you want to know about all programs related to that. Can anyone think of anything?
I think you would have to also consider elected officials. They have some guidelines on what they want to see in the budget that has some importance to be able to pull that out if they're requiring or wanting to look at something like housing. That's important to them and have that listed also.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm also thinking of things that we may have programs that could be either grant funded, and at what point do those grants go away? Or we have, when you were on mandates, if we have things that are mandated and the federal or state governments provide funding, at what point does that mandate still exist, but the funding is no longer there? Especially, we do a 2-year budget. So in order to keep up with that, to know when we're going to have, a prime example of that is we may have a SAFER grant that's supporting 60 firefighters. And so we need to keep track, when do those firefighters come off that grant, and we need to be ramping up to when we have to fully take on all of their payroll expense.
Fantastic point. And definitely one that could be integrated into cost recovery or created on its own. Right now, the cost recovery is very simple. Does it recover costs? Yes or no? But there's so much room, as you said, to say, what does it, there's so much room for interpretation and variation for what cost recovery means. You can put this on a percentage scale, or you can say, recovers cost grant recipient, and have that be, a score of a 1, for example. And then everything that scores a 1, you need to, and then in the department comments here, you can say grant expires in X years. And then when that grant expires, or when that, when that federal funding is going to expire, whatever it is. And you're able to then filter that. And that's why these scores are so, they're not scores in the traditional sense that we're trying to get a total and the highest number wins. They're really representative of an attribute of that program. They show that this is grant funded and we want to know about it. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's note it somewhere in this system, and then be able to look organization wide to say, what are all our grant funded programs? When are the grants going to expire? That's a great point. Anyone else thinking about anything? Yeah.
This is Sherry. I have a question. Sorry, I should have raised my hand, I guess.
No, it's fine.
I'm wondering, I'm trying to think about this practically, how we would do this for police. We're a department of around 1,000 employees. And I'm wondering if we could manage it like 11 mini departments. We have 11 main divisions, or 10. Maybe we could do this exercise. I could sit with each of our divisions, kind of go through the process divisionally. A lot of the patrol officers are going to be the same among 3 divisions, but there are many other officers throughout that will have vastly different job duties. And maybe I could enter all this information, combine, and then the software would combine the common attributes and roll it all up into one departmental thing at the end. Is that a possibility? I can more narrowly focus.
Yeah, I think I'm understanding what you're saying. So, if we were to think about, if you wanted to be the person using the system, or there is a download that you can see here if you wanted to use Excel, just going to pull one of these. I'll go specifically into police and then pull something up so we can see. I think that I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying here. So we have the opportunity, like you said, you can filter on these program names, and then essentially even either on the software or again in a download, you could, go through the discussion of having them score the programs associated. Or I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. A different view, I've been focusing primarily here, but we also have the option to score by program. And like you said, you could filter on that division function. Right now, there aren't any in there, but this sorts alphabetically, so you can filter on it. And then, of course, only look at the ones that are particularly relevant to that particular division that we're looking at. And then run, again, kind of either do it through the software or through a download, and do it that way. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I guess until I'm actually in there doing it, I won't really know for certain. Maybe after tomorrow it will become more clear. It's just such a broad process. It seems time consuming. If my brain can think about it more narrowly by division and then roll it up into the department at the end, I think it would go easier, at least for my area.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe I'm not thinking broadly enough, but we'll see how it goes. I'm definitely excited about it, so I think it's something we can do.
Yeah, I think you're right on to identify, narrowing it down. And we do have, like you said, we have this division filtering availability, and they can all fall under the same user group or department, as we were talking about. I think there's a lot of different ways that we could support that narrowing of focus.
One more clarifying question to that. Were you thinking of the approach to costing?
More the whole entire process from beginning till end, really.
Sure. I think your line of thought is really good. My brain went to costing as I was listening to you ask your question, with 1,000 FTE and just thinking through 11 functional units. And there are ways in the cost allocation approach to organize your positions, your people, in a way, a hierarchy. So you can go police department, then your 11 main divisions are the next level of drill down. And then you can click into a division if your employees are associated there, and begin to allocate them to programs. I only share that as I was interpreting your question specifically as it related to costing.
Yes, that would be, if we had the ability to do that, it would definitely ease the time consuming and trying to roll everything up. I can look at an org chart for a division, sit down with the divisions and identify programs to make sure we have everything covered properly. Because one division might do something different that we're not aware of.
Makes sense how you're thinking about it.
So to Chris's point, some things that I'll point out that might be helpful, is exactly what he was talking about in that program costing. Right now, we don't have any divisions, but if we wanted to, I'll just, no one has to follow along to this. We can talk about it, when things become, this is very detailed, but we have the ability to change the way that you see this data, the way that it's sliced. So if you wanted to, you could see, I'll go ahead and show this quote unquote division first. Like I said, there's not a division, so right now there's no words here, but imagine, it would say, patrol services and, something else, whatever 11 divisions they break out into. And then under each of those, you'd be able to see the personnel and non-personnel associated for each one of those divisions. And so then it's just a smaller chunk of each of those. And we can talk a lot about, in further detail about the way the data goes in, the way it's organized, the way that we're able to view it here. But, all that to say, we do have the ability to quote unquote slice and dice in a lot of different directions. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle back home. One other question I did have as it relates to program scoring, I've heard pretty loudly and clearly that we do, it is a desire of the folks on this call to score their programs against some community specific results and potentially some governance results. I'm asking more for curiosity than anything. Do you all have these results already, or what kind of process would you guys envision for that result scoring?
I think we're close. Dorita may jump in on this. I mean, we are very close to our second iteration of our strategic plan being finalized. We call it the AIM plan. So I pulled it up earlier when we were talking about this. And so like our overarching, like one of our aims or kind of overarching goals is to create neighborhoods and infrastructure that promote health and safety. And then under that, we have, like we call them community performance indicators. So For instance, our eviction rate is one of those. Tulsans having access to stable, affordable housing. So we measure that through like a survey that we do about every 18 months. And we have strategies and actions associated with each of those as well. So I think so. And then we even have measures down below that. So that are more specific to like what the city's role in that piece is. So I think we're close in that regard. And I think it's timely because we're right at the point where we're getting ready to sort of roll out this new strategic plan. I'll let Dorita fill in the gaps there as well. But
I think we have some like economy, neighborhood, social connection. I think we are lacking in areas such as infrastructure, culture and entertainment, transportation, those kinds of things. But I think we've done enough thought that it would be pretty easy to flesh out some results in the areas that we're lacking.
So I pulled up a different tab here and I can share this data with you. This is publicly shared data from the city of Salem. Go ahead and put the link in the chat for those that are interested, but I'll show it here. This is a screenshot of what you saw earlier. And each of these tabs represents their results. And then underneath here, we can see the definitions associated. So this is their governance result. They also have some for natural environment and stewardship. And then the definitions associated, they have safe community, they have safe and reliable infrastructure, strong and diverse economy, and each of the definitions, so on and so forth. And then we also have a tab for all of them. So to say, the programs what are the programs that scored most in most alignment with all of the results that are appropriate, where the darkness of the box representing the program, the shading of the program, or the box itself represents the highest alignment, and then the size of the box represents the cost itself of the program. And so I showed this just kind of as a quick view to be able to demonstrate what a visually appealing, kind of very clean version of programs and their final results would look like, as well as maybe kind of a bit of whetting the appetite for Results for America folks, as well as those of you who are thinking about each of those AIM plans or each of those strategic goals and things like that. Can you envision it fitting into something like this? And this would be what a final deliverable looks like that you can kind of sluice into, and you can always click on a program to get even more detailed, so on and so forth, and have them broken out into a variety of different kind of divisions or departments. So overall, I think we're winding down here. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to our slides and try to get you out of here on time. Hopefully now you're seeing my slides again, and we're able to kind of again put a bow in this and be almost done. The last data layer that we didn't exactly put into the tools, but I did talk quite a bit about, is these program insights. And so kind of here, like I said, they're the top layer. They're kind of the cherry on top of all of the other data layers. And they are really, program insight. We have a variety of different categories. They can align to something that you want for your organization, for our blueprint, a variety of others. But generally we see them relate into some kind of category of changes of service levels, whether that be increase or decrease, opportunities for efficiency, opportunities for partnership or source change, and then if there are any revenue generating opportunities, either through grant recipient or increases in fees for service of some kind, or other opportunities outside of what's listed there. So generally, we go through, we create the programs, we create the costs, we create the scores associated, and then folks can go through and essentially do what we call tagging in a program for an insight. And they would mark in the tool that they want to see this program, for example, have an increased service level in the next 2 years or whatever it may be, because I know you all operate on a 2-year budget. So in the tool, it goes from simply having this data and having this knowledge to instead being something that we can demonstrate as a total representation, you know, we have programs that are representative of 105,000 or $105 million. This is from the city of Denver, so big numbers. But that, you know, that have been marked for opportunities for increase. We have some programs to the tune of $74 million that have been marked for opportunities for decreasing service levels, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of a cool way to see the one of the final cherry on top views in the tools, in addition to the present site from Salem that I just sent out in that link. This is another great view of the data to see. Overall, this is what we're trying to drive to, is being able to have insights for programs. And, you know, we have total cost for those particular insights, total cost for the particular programs, and then a series of all of the other data layers represented in the screen here underneath it, that then are ripe for analysis after we have this, you know, all of these kind of working together. So Chris will talk a lot more about insights tomorrow, but I just wanted to demonstrate, you know, I know we didn't do it particularly in the software today, but this is what, you know, this is what a final view of doing insights would look like. And as we kind of push toward conclusion here, I'd love to hear from some folks now that we've gone through almost 3 hours of training here. You know, and you're slightly more familiar with program-based business intelligence and what an implementation would look like. Does anyone have any thoughts kind of on what their intents, concerns, dreams, and boundaries would be overall?
I don't know if I'll be able to cover all of them, but I mean, I would say intents are really to, like I think it was Dorita earlier that kind of, or maybe Amy, I can't recall who it was, but mentioned, you know, that we do strategic planning, we do budgeting, but really those processes don't, I mean, we've tried to align them by sort of putting the strategic planning language in our budget, but from a process perspective, they're really not integrated. So I think that's, I think an intent, a concern is the amount of time that it would take to do this, and getting bogged down in the weeds and trying to get it perfect, as opposed to just, you know, really trying to come up with something that works. And I guess maybe that goes with the bounds as well, in terms of just knowing how, I mean, most of the folks on this call are on sort of a 10% time reduction weekly and furloughed through the end of the year. So that's a constraint for sure, and I'm going to recognize that and call it out. I'd say a long-term dream is that, you know, for the folks that are here now administering the city, for the folks that come in the future, that we have a city that's that services are adaptable, and that we can see what the services we provide and adapt those over time to meet the changing needs of our residents and our business owners. And I think that, you know, to me, that the ability to do that, using the budget as the tool to do that, is really sort of like the Mount Everest, I think. So I think that happens to some degree, but it's hard to make that happen, I think, sometimes. And it's really hard to articulate it, I think, to the folks who have a lot of decisions to make. So I think, you know, you mentioned the communication piece of this early on, and I think that that's it's going to be tempting to kind of just dive into the numbers, and that's a very important piece of it, but the communication piece is really important as well. So that would be my summary. I'd love to hear others, though.
I would too.
Well, I mentioned both of these things throughout, but I can see this being amazingly helpful in helping us just understand what, you know, not even reprioritizing yet, but just understanding what we're doing. I think we'd all be surprised, and our staffs would be surprised. And as I would have been thinking through when you were looking at those allocations, you know, I'd probably be really shocked to see back from some of my staff where their efforts are being spent, where the majority of their time is. And there's going to be lots of instances where that doesn't align with what my vision for the department is, let alone the city's overall strategic plan. And it's not because they're you know, they're just doing what they're told to do, and we're just not making that connection. So I think just figuring out that piece without even doing other improvements would probably allow us to be incredibly more efficient and mindful. And then this is just kind of reiterated what I said at the beginning that I was hopeful of, is that it would, I think this type of thinking will help us understand and value more lots of work that is happening in the city that is way, in my opinion, is way, way, way undervalued now. The work around neighborhoods, the work around parks, and some of these other sort of community building things that have been hard for us to, you know, when you get a choice for money, I mean, a cop always beats, you know, someone who mows grass or whatever it is. But when you start thinking about the overall program and the overall impact you're trying to have, and if you really can understand the return on those investments in terms of reaching those goals, I think it would be pretty powerful shift for us if we can get there. So this, I mean, I think this makes it possible, but all of the limitations that James and others have talked about, I mean, time and money, it's the same thing you run into no matter what you're talking about, but time and money will be the thing that'll make this hard to do. But it's also the return we get in the end. If we can find a way to make it, you get more time and money. So.
Mm-hmm. I want everyone to know we did not tell her to say that. She just said it all on her own. But we say that all the time, right? It's kind of, again, coming from the client side, my boss said this as I was helping her try to implement this is, you know, there's 101 things to do on everyone's plate. And if this falls to, you know, number 100, it would make the other 99 easier, but it's just you know, time and money is always a constraint. And I totally agree with that. But, you know, doing this, if you're able to, you know, dedicate the time, helps the other 99 things that are on the plate get done, helps you prioritize the 99 things on the plate. It helps you, you know, be able to understand the impact and the investment, as you said, Anna. That's a great point.
I agree with Anna and James as they've gone through some of the 10 concerns. My only thing, my dream is what I really, is that as we move forward and we're at least able to explore this approach and try and implement it, my dream is, it's almost a can't wait, will I live long enough to see it. The whole organization transformed is the thought process, so we can begin to start allocating resources based on what we know to be priorities, and as Anna said, is undervalued a lot. So, you know, that's my dream. It's just, you know, I think it's pregnant with possibilities, you know, and I just look for us, you know, really giving birth to this new way of thinking or reimagining how we fund programs and budget around here. This was, I don't know, you know, just historical, as my understanding, and Tammy could know more about this as well. My understanding that this, I don't know if they call it priority-based budgeting or just program budgeting, but I know that the whole concept was thought of and discussed earlier, but it was just too hard. You know, it took a lot. So, and I don't think, you know, at the time we were really positioned to do it, much like we are now. James mentioned furlough, which means we have dwindling resources. It was just hard. And I just, anyone, the others that's listening, I can't see how many still on here. This is not an easy task, and it's going to take some time. And it might take 8 weeks to go through it and kind of understand it a little bit, but changing this organization to this philosophy of budgeting it's a multi-year process. And but my dream is to see it all happen.
I think that's a great point, and I think it sets up very well kind of a quick conclusion on the next day, as well as gives us a little bit of time for Chris to speak exactly as all of you were talking about, like what the realization of that process looks like. So kind of as a quick wrap up for what we talked about today, we talked about each of those PBBI data layers, and they serve as a platform for conversation talking about all of the great benefits of the services that you all provide that may be getting the stories that may not be being told right now or being told at the volume that they should be. And we do this, we create these data layers. These data layers are, definitely, as you said, Dwayne, that there's an iterative process to them. There is a nature where we are going to do some allocations, and then we see what the total result is, and then we go back and do some changes to those allocations. There is an iterative nature to it, absolutely. Overall, though, the emphasis would be that we create the data, we generate some programmatic insights, and then we're able to take action on those. And so tomorrow, again, as you had talked about, there is all of that conceptually, and there is so much more going on, not in the periphery, but just as equally important is the organizational culture associated and the organizational change that this would require. And so tomorrow we're going to talk quite a bit about the people side of creating this and making this happen, ensuring that everyone is bought into the process and that we're moving at a pace that is sustainable and indeed, ensures that this bears fruit for the adaptive change that James was talking about, not just a 1 or 2 year thing, but something that everyone in the organization understands and is bought into. So part of that looks, is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. And then Chris is going to talk about what this looks like when you begin to start taking action on the data. When it's all, can you imagine it all being done, and then what the opportunities are? As Anna said, from a present point of view, even just getting a snapshot, as well as then thinking even further into the future. Present snapshot, this is what it is. What do we want the future snapshot 1 year, 5 years to look like in terms of our programmatic allocations and so on? Chris, anything else you wanted to add there with about the 5 minutes left?
Man, I love the exercise that you just went through, Jackie and James and Anna and Dwayne. Your comments were so good. In just processing it all, you're right. The effort is to generate the return on investment from more time, more resources repurposed, more time saved and reallocated, and to get those types of insights. Some of the earlier discussion was around even phasing in departments. We do have many organizations who do a citywide implementation, but they phase in the data layers. For example, maybe you do a program inventory and cost allocation, and maybe some tagging with those basic program attributes, and stop there. And that's a really powerful data set. Your program-based business intelligence is programmed by inventory, and the cost allocation, revenue allocation, as well as some knowledge about what's mandated and what's not. And you give yourself the time to say, hey, your strategic plan is in progress, but maybe you tackle scoring against results in a phase 2. That is what a lot of organizations do. That thought occurred to me. We have a lot of organizations, especially in COVID, saying, what can I do to get great programmatic data to tease out insights that we can take action on sooner than later, knowing that won't interfere with your longer term vision, so you can have your cake and eat it too, is the point. So very possible for the concerns on time and the constraints that are very real. We can talk, James and Tammy, we can talk about ways that you can phase this in to make it more manageable and still have the type of return that you're looking for. Apart from that, man, it's not often that we get a chance to do a prep course with this type of representation across an organization. Most of the time, it's the few who are going to champion and lead the effort, and they leave a prep course with excitement and vision, and then they have the daunting task of going back to an organization and telling you all about everything that they just learned. I'm so appreciative that you all put in the time to get a chance to hear Jackie's presentation and get an understanding of what this is all about. And tomorrow, I'm very much looking forward to it as well, because Today was data creation and the hopefully simplicity of the tools and methodology. And tomorrow we'll talk about, what does it mean to your staff and your people from Eric Keck's perspective on culture. And I'm very much looking forward to wrapping it up with what does this begin to look like as communities start to receive that return on investment and they are repurposing and down to a program level and specific examples. We hope to tie it all up for you. So just wanted to say thanks again for putting in all the time today, and we look forward to tomorrow.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline and Chris. I really appreciate your time, and just really excited about the opportunities and really kind of learning the next steps tomorrow as well.
Thanks, James.